Good afternoon, and welcome to this joint BSI and Institution of Fire Engineers webinar on issues and risks relating to building works in occupied buildings. My name is Simon Hamlet, and I'm the Senior Standards Manager for Built Environment and Fire at BSI. I'm very pleased that so many of you are joining us today and look forward to what I know will be an interesting and informative webinar. Next slide, please. Just a few housekeeping points before we go any further. This is a listen-only webinar that is being recorded. We welcome your questions via the Q&A function, and these will be answered after the presentations. If you have a question, simply click on the Q&A button in the side panel and post it there. If you experience technical difficulties, please submit your issue via that same Q&A function. Upon completion of the feedback survey, BSI will send a link to the recording of the webinar. This is a CPD recognised webinar. Please request your certificate via the feedback survey following the webinar. Next slide, please. There are risks involved in any type of building work, but these are increased when the building is occupied due to the presence of people living or working there. In particular, fire safety can be negatively affected if fire risk assessments are not properly carried out or reviewed, or if contractors lack the necessary competence. As Ian Bailey will explain in more detail later, crucial systems for the prevention, detection, or suppression of a fire can be deactivated or blocked, often unknowingly, to facilitate part of the works. Since 2021, the Cross-UK reporting system has been expanded to include fire safety, and reports that have been submitted since then have shown how smoke control and sprinkler systems have been compromised through lack of understanding of the consequences. In other instances, occupying buildings too early and lack of contractor competence puts occupants at risk. Had a fire occurred, then these actions could have had very serious implications. BSI has developed a standard for competence requirements for safety in residential buildings called PAS 8673 to support the need for greater competence of those working in the built environment. It is part of a suite of competence standards developed in response to the Grenfell Tower fire and provides a benchmark for assessing competence in building safety management. It is aimed at both individuals and organisations. I'm very pleased to be joined today by two experts in this field. Ian Bailey, who will present on fire safety risks in occupied buildings, is a technical advisor in the Institution of Fire Engineers and a fire engineering consultant at Collaborative Reporting for Safer Structures UK. He has over 33 years of experience in the fire sector, including as an operational fire officer in the London Fire Brigade, serving as Senior Fire Safety Officer, Area Fire Safety Group Manager, and 4 years in the LFB Fire Engineering Group. A graduate with a first-class honours degree in fire engineering and an incorporated engineer, Ian has particular interests in competency, risk assessment, mega warehouses, modern methods of construction, and the challenges of evacuation equality. Brian Atkin will speak about PAS 8673 competence requirements for safety in residential buildings, of which he was the technical author. He is also the technical author of more than a dozen other British and international standards, sits on BSI's Facilities Management Technical Committee, FMW1, and is a BSI Standards Maker Award winner for representing the UK. He holds a doctorate from the University of Reading and is a Fellow of the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors and of the Chartered Institute of Building. Now I'm going to hand over to Ian for his presentation.
Thank you, Simon. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see such a well-attended session, and I hope you'll take something away from this. I'm first going to start with a little bit of a repeat of the overview Simon mentioned. So next slide, please. So this is a brief summary of what I'm going to talk about today. It comes from CROSS reports in my role as a CROSS fire engineer, and we've sort of started to see a bit of a trend in occupied buildings, building works going on in occupied buildings. We've had multiple reports that all seem to fit into this category, where fire safety measures, be they passive or active, are being compromised during building works. This brief analysis, I'll give you a quick summary of where we've got to and what our key takeaways from this are. It's about a lack of competence of contractors, perhaps not understanding the risks of deactivating or obstructing systems, and also poor management primarily in terms of not reviewing your fire risk assessment, keeping your fire risk assessment as a live document. So this is obviously resulting in a heightened risk to occupants, and the RP is also being exposed to a legal risk if something goes wrong. Next slide, please. So I'll just quickly explain CROSS, and I've got a couple of slides explaining where we come from and how you can contribute to the building safety around you. So I'll also talk about these safety systems I'm talking about. I'll go into a bit more detail on them. I'm also going to talk about the importance of the legal of the fire assessment reviews. I'm going to briefly touch on small contractors and in-house maintenance competence. And I'm going to mention the heightened risks during combustible cladding remediations. And finally, I'll end with some pointers and actions that we believe are worth highlighting to RPs and managers and contractors during building works. Next slide, please. So what is CROSS? So in 1976, after the Ronan Point collapse, Standing Committee on Structural Safety was set up, called SCOSS. This was set up by the IStruct and the Institute of Civil Engineers, and this was to identify trends and developments that might risk structural safety. And in 1995, it received HSE support as well. That was the foundation of where we are. Then in 2005, a voluntary confidential reporting system was set up. It was called Confidential Reporting on Structural Safety, and CROSS was born as a name. The concept primarily came out of NASA and the aviation sector. It was not a whistleblowing system, but it was a confidential reporting system, the primary aim being to extract the learning out of events. It originated more than 30 years ago with the aviation sector reporting system, and CROSS, as in the 2005 setup, was set up to sort of reflect that confidential nature, the aim being to extract learning. Then post Grenfell, 6 months after Grenfell, Dame Judith Hackett produced her interim report, and Dame Judith subsequently went on to make a distinct recommendation that CROSS should be extended into safety and strengthened. And so CROSS, as in confidential reporting on safer structures, was born. In 2020, the UK government provided funding to expand CROSS and fulfill the recommendation of 1.4C of the Building Safety Act. So CROSS began working with the Institute of Fire Engineers to develop and run CROSS UK for fire safety. Next slide, please. So we sit in the right-hand side of the building safety regulator system. So we're a voluntary occurrence reporting. We're not mandatory occurrence reporting, nor are we whistleblowing or residence actions or reporting systems. So primarily, as I said before, the aim is to extract learning from people's mistakes or where people see problems arising or emerging risks. Next slide, please. So how the reporting process works: you submit a report, and this report on our website. It's a very simple system. Put through a report, then designated people. There's a very limited number of people who actually see your report in its entirety. then anonymise the report, so they're taking out all your personal details and also anonymising it from the point of view of the party or the building or what have you, the product that you're reporting about. So it's completely anonymised. And then we edit the report for clarity and send it to an expert panel, which is on our website. The cream of the crop, if you want to put it that way, of experts in the sector for structures and fire. And they send us in comments and we translate those into a coherent report, and that is then sent for legal review, and you get an opportunity to review your anonymised report before it's published. Next slide, please. And so what can be reported can be the design phase, construction phase, the occupation phase, or even end of life phase. So it's a whole range of suites around building safety. Next slide, please. So where we came to start seeing this trend, it primarily came about, we had two reports in quick succession describing 3 buildings where AOV, automatic opening vents, smoke vents, had been disabled during and following remediation works. So report 1347 highlighted 2 buildings undergoing cladding remediation where automatic opening vents were rendered non-functional for months afterwards. And in the first case, this was due to the contractors improperly disconnecting the AOVs from their electrical components. And in the second case, the new cladding was screwed into the frame of the existing AOVs, rendering them inoperable. And then we had a second report of very similar nature where a contractor had masked up the window style AOV vents. And I'll explain the detail of what these window style vents are in a moment. Possibly mistaking them for windows, which is by design, before applying a render finish to the walls. So these 2 systems and 3 buildings led us to think that this could be a safety issue. So we issued a fire safety alert, cross safety alert in November last year about this as well, which is the image on the right. So AOVs, these vents play a crucial role in smoke control systems in buildings, and their impairment, whether deliberate or inadvertently, significantly increases the risks to occupants and firefighters in the event of fire. So the expert panel highlighted a number of failings, ranging from the lack of awareness by contractors as to even the existence of these events, and the apparent lack of use of CDM regs, such as appropriate construction phase plans, risk assessment, method statements, etc., etc. Also, we identified failings by the responsible person or accountable person, the building management, and that fundamentally the fire risk assessment should have been reviewed. So even if scaffolding is erected outside your building, you're changing the nature of the building, its potential for external fire spread, and therefore that would be a significant change. Therefore, perhaps your fire risk assessment should be reviewed at that stage, but also to ensure smoke control systems also work. Scaffolding may even block some of the systems, the window vents, doing this. So fundamentally, if they knew the AOVs were going to be disabled, that's affecting the smoke control system. And again, that's a significant change in the risk profile of your building. So that should have been reviewed at that stage as well. It's also to ensure the evacuation strategy still works. So if you do have to disable a AOV, you might need to put in place some mitigations or controls in place to ensure either your stay put or simultaneous evacuation strategy is still effective. But also, the risk assessment can give you some insights into how to manage the contractors and to ensure that the contractors have, the risk assessment can identify these critical areas, and you can then pass that on to your contractors to ensure that they're not disabled or affected by the building works. And if they have been disabled, again, you have to put controls in place. It's worth noting that sometimes these AOVs may be deliberately disabled, as sometimes this has happened. I know from experience in the past that some flammable clad buildings have had these closed off where they're close to means of escape to prevent fire coming in, and that was until the cladding had been removed. And the aim being to slow the spread of fire from an external cladding fire into the escape routes, such as the staircase. But in these premises, the management and the fire risk assessor has made a considered and controlled choice to do so. This is often involving further controls, such as a change of evacuation strategy to simultaneous evacuation and the installation of a common alarm system. So this is very different from the uncontrolled and inadvertent impairment of AOVs described in the 3 reports above. So don't mistake that as the same. Next slide, please. So firstly, just going to mention what an AOV, window style AOV looks like. So there's a number of types of AOV. It's an automatic opening vent. The window style ones are like the ones on the right hand 2 pictures. So one is from inside a building where an AOV is opened, and it looks like a standard window from the inside and the outside. And again, the picture slightly to the left with the bars, the safety rails on the window, the one above that is an AOV as well. So these are both very easy to mistake for normal windows, and if contractors aren't aware of these systems, they may inadvertently, or yourself as a manager or an RP, may even not be aware of these. So there are other ways of controlling smoke control in the common parts of residential buildings in particular, but we're not hearing so many issues around natural smoke shafts or mechanical extraction vents. So these are normally identified. They look the natural shafts or the mechanical vents sometimes look like cupboard doors in the corridors or in the lobbies, and they'll usually have a label on "Do Not Obstruct." Or you might see vent grills as well. But we're not hearing. And if I'm wrong, send me a report. We'd like to hear if we have come across places where these have been disabled inadvertently as well. And the picture on the left is a roof AOV, which is a vent which is usually at the head of the staircase, with the one with the ladder pitched up against it looking up. So that's also, but rarely do we see those with any problems apart from breakdowns. They're rarely obstructed by contractor work. So please report if you tell us otherwise if there are some issues. Next slide, please. So also, this is where we start to put the building works being one of the critical factors in all of this. Is we also had reports number 1336, where building work was being undertaken in a supermarket warehouse and the sprinklers were disabled there while works was ongoing. But there appear to have been no controls put in place to mitigate the action. The expert panel highlighted a fire risk assessment review was a fundamental before this action was taken, and a fire occurred leading to significant loss and difficulties by the fire crews trying to control it within the warehouse area. Again, lack of control under CDM regs, similar to before, and critically, regular communication between contractors and management appeared lacking. Another report we got, which we've tied into this, is 1237, where a smoke control system was found to be faulty and the repair was going to take a week waiting for parts. It was correctly reported to a fire brigade under the Fire Safety England regulations about essential firefighting equipment. Great, but then they proceeded to do nothing to control the risk. So they've told us, a fire brigade, that there was no smoke control system in the single stair building, but then proceeded to resist doing anything about it. So fundamentally, a fire risk assessment should have been done at the point they knew that the system was out of action for more than 24 hours, I think is the Fire Safety England regulations threshold. And then what they eventually did was put in place a simultaneous evacuation strategy until it was repaired. But it's all well and good reporting the issue, but you have to control the risk. Your risk assessment is no longer suitable and sufficient if it doesn't have a fundamental feature of the safety systems, the active safety systems in place. I've also highlighted an older building report about the risks of scaffolding presents when raised outside tall buildings. This is 1153. It's sort of topical now as well. We're getting a lot of cladding remediations being done, so it's worthy of noting some of the risks involved with cladding scaffolding outside buildings. And the recent fire in the Spectrum building, albeit is under investigation, highlights some of the reporters' predictions, i.e. it was visually clear that the scaffolding exacerbated the fire spread. And now that's not to say there's any blame involved in that particular fire. You can put controls in place and fire still can happen, and that is the nature of risk, but, and notably, everyone got out. So, but it's a good example of the risk scaffolding presents, whether controlled or not. But if you don't consider the control the risk at all, or don't look at it where necessary, then people may be put at risk. There's also been many other cases. There's hotel refurbishments we've seen where floors have been, they've been refurbished floor by floor, whilst keeping the remainder of the building occupied and rooms rented out. So, and where contractors have impacted the staircase or the compartmentation while doing works, without consideration that could affect the means of escape of the hotel occupants. And finally, the usual one we see a lot of is also fire alarm systems being decommissioned during building works, i.e. with dust covers while decoration works are going on or building works, but then failing to reinstate the systems or take the covers off at the end. That's a very common one as well. Next slide, please. So another two reports were about building works continuing in newly built buildings. It's a very similar vein, but these two reports highlight where there's a rush to occupy a building. So student accommodation report 1214 highlights there was partial completion of compartmentation and fire alarm systems in place, and there was occupying parts of the building. One was also a high-risk residential building, and this is before the gateways, so hopefully the gateways will prevent this in future. But again, the risk assessment should have been reviewed to reflect the building's live state rather than what it was intended to be built as. And it must reflect and control the risks as found, not the systems being planned or still under construction. Next slide, please. So just a brief recap on the law around reviewing your fire risk assessment. So there's a legal duty to maintain the fire risk assessment as a live document, and it applies throughout the UK. In England and Wales, these requirements are imposed by the RRO as amended. That's Article 9.3. And so these are the two quotes: where there is a reason to suspect it is no longer valid, e.g. smoke control system is not working, or there's been a significant change, i.e. you're planning major building works, you're planning on putting scaffolding up the side of the building. So they're the two primarily factors around reviewing your fire risk assessment. So in Scotland, similar requirements are imposed by the Fire Scotland Act in conjunction with the Fire Safety Scotland regulations. And in Northern Ireland, similar requirements are imposed by the Fire and Rescue Services Northern Ireland Order in conjunction with the Fire Safety Regulations Northern Ireland 2010. So it's a UK-wide requirement to have a risk assessment. Next slide, please. So just a brief one on small contractors. We had a report highlighting two instances of small contractors, in-house handy persons. One was working on the electrics in the building, leading to a fire in a care home. And the other was fitting intermittent strips onto notional fire doors and rendered those scrap by putting them in the wrong place. So those are two ones to highlight if your manager or is ensuring that your competence requirements of your handy persons or small contractors meet the work you're asking them to do. Next slide. Just want a brief mention on cladding remediations, as this is a topical subject. Although this is, it's cross-cutting with what I've discussed earlier, cladding remediations and risk assessments obviously must be reviewed during these processes. You're looking at if there's any increased risks during this process, i.e. you're exposing cladding materials, maybe the a flammable core even, you're putting scaffolding up and screens up, safety screens, which may affect smoke control systems. Are you blocking smoke vents? And also control of hot works and cutting as well is critical within this stage. So putting in place controls, your risk assessment should look if the fire strategy is still viable. And if in exceptionally high circumstances, and this is probably the rarity, I would suggest that the evacuation strategy needs to be looked at. If it's, I've not heard of any cases yet, but I suggest it is a possibility, albeit an unlikely one, that the occupation of the building may be in question as well. So it's worth ensuring that you have a good fire risk assessment in place to put controls in place to avoid that if you can. Next slide, please. So these are some of the actions which I'm suggesting out of these reports that managers and RPs and APs should look at. So again, highlighting you must ensure that the fire risk assessment is suitable and sufficient at all times. Plan of works, you must have a plan of works agreed under CDM regulations 4. You must have awareness of your own safety systems. This is important. If as a manager of the building, you need to know what parts, you don't need to know the ins and outs of it or the technicalities of it, but you must have an awareness of where your vents are, your fans are, your fire doors are, etc., etc. And where works are undertaken that require safety systems to be compromised, appropriate control measures must be in place. Must also ensure building works are carried out in accordance with the agreed plan of works and fire risk assessments, and critically also to employ competent contractors to do works, particularly around fire stopping and working on smoke control systems. For contractors, we're pressing for them to be all trained in the basic fire safety, and also if you've got safety systems in place, making sure that they're aware of where they are and what not to interfere with during the works. And also contractors shouldn't change the plan of works without consulting the stakeholders. Communication between the RP and AP and subcontractors is also critical, and been called toolbox briefings, but just having conversations about what's happening in the building can also help you manage this risk. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. This is just a brief one highlighting that CROSS, you can sign up to CROSS to receive newsletters. So these are quarterly, so there's no, you don't get bombarded with risks. It's also from the IFE's point of view, good CPD as well to be reading safety issues around fire. So highly recommend signing up, and you scan that code if you can. I'll then hand you over to Brian Atkin, who is going to talk about competence and PAS 8673. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ian. Very good afternoon to you all. Thank you for being here to hear about competence requirements for the management of safety in residential buildings. As you'll see there, I am the technical author of this document, this standard. I'll explain more about it in detail as we move forward. So if we could have the next slide, please. So this is the outline of my presentation. It is going to be very much about this document, this standard, and I hope by the end of this presentation you would be very interested in downloading it and applying it in your work. It does have wide application. It doesn't stand on its own. There are relationships with other standards. I think you might expect that to be the case. And the specifics of this standard I'll go into, starting with the scope and two key principles that lie behind it. I will then share with you the competence areas. Think of competencies as capabilities, but I'll go into more detail about that subsequently. That's on a high level, but on a more detailed operational level, there are competencies. Some of you may think, well, is there a difference? Well, yes, there is, perhaps a subtle difference, and I'll explain how these fit together. But certainly for now, the competence areas, that in itself should suggest something that's on a high level, and the detailed or individual competencies are those things that people need to be able to do. And lastly, on there you can see competence assessment. So I'm going to take you through briefly what needs to be done to make sure that everyone is keeping up to date and maintaining their competence. Have the next slide, please. I was going to read this out, but I think you can read it for yourselves. And for me, that is really what it's all about. If you have the next slide, please. So we'll spend a few minutes on what the standard is about, what it's trying to achieve, and we'll start with some basic ideas around the standard. You'll all, I'm sure, be familiar with British standards, BSs, been around a long time. In fact, the first national standards were actually produced. They were developed in this country. This is a particular kind of standard. It's a publicly available specification. So that's what PAS stands for, publicly available specification. This particular one is in a suite of such PASs, and it does have a particular function. So let me just explain briefly. As in common with all standards, they are consensus documents. It's very important to stress this point. They are consensus documents, and therefore we have to take account of all the interested parties that have something to say. By definition, they have a legitimate interest in the development of these standards. Normally, a PAS would be used as a vehicle for a fast-track development. We need to get something out into industry. We need to get it there as soon as we can. You will also understand that in this particular area that it's absolutely crucial that we did consult widely. We had a substantial membership in terms of the steering of this development work, representing diverse interests. All of that meant that it took longer, in fact rather longer than we planned. But the important point here is that we got buy-in from a wide cross-section, and that is essential to having something which is going to deliver, and we'll say more about exactly what that is shortly. There was an intention originally that this would be used to support the definition of the role of a building safety manager. You've already noticed that the title of the standard, and I'll flash it up on the subsequent slides, it refers to the management of building safety rather than being tied to an individual such as a building safety manager. This was a bit of an issue at the time, and I think to just sum it all up, there was a view generally that if there were to be a building safety manager, that would come at a cost, that that person would have to be employed for that particular purpose, and the cost would have to be borne by someone. And I think the view was that this would be seen as yet another burden on leaseholders. And so it became more of an approach to defining the competencies for someone in a position of authority, and that person is the accountable person. We'll say a bit more about that shortly. So the important thing is that management of building safety takes place, and it takes place properly. It's certainly possible for any organisation to employ a building safety manager, and indeed many do, but the PAS is not providing directly a specification for that purpose. But let me not say too much more about that for now. The last thing to say on this slide is it's free. You can obtain a copy of this from BSI. You can also obtain a copy through the Property Institute. They have a link on their website. So no excuses for not getting a copy of it. And the next slide, please. So there we've got at the top the full title of this standard: Competence Requirements, Management of Safety in Residential Buildings. It's a specification. A specification sets requirements. Probably seems as though I'm being a little bit picky about this, but the operative word is shall. So requirements, specifications are all to do with what shall be done. You will find that there are British standards which say this should be done, but they are not specifications. They're not stating requirements. This PAS does set the requirements. It is a specification, and this is what shall be done in terms of the competencies. So as we can see here, the purpose of it is to provide support to accountable persons. Now, we recognise that there may be more than one, so the principal accountable person might be applicable there. But basically what we are ensuring is that someone is able to fulfill this role, and to do that they obviously need to be equipped to do so, and this is what this specification is about. It is applying to residential accommodation, but it clearly, and these are my words, it's clearly relevant to other types of building. Building safety is building safety. And one of the main reasons for having this PAS is that it's there to help understand what competencies, what capabilities are needed to fulfill this important role. Now, it can be for the persons actually undertaking the work, or if there are others involved, what we expect of those. So these 2 points on the right-hand side here allow us to be able to determine if those individuals or organisations, and then it's individuals as well, that are undertaking building safety management are up to the job, to put it in plain language. So we've got a framework, we've got a way of determining obviously what those competencies are in the first place, but whether or not the people involved directly are aligned with it. We can have the next slide, please. I said initially there were other standards which related to this, so we'll spend just a few moments on this. In fact, there is a suite of standards, and perhaps not surprisingly, you see at the top there that there are standards, or PASs, in relation to the principal designer and the principal contractor. Those were developed in parallel with this PAS, and collectively they represent the competencies in relation to building safety management with respect to residential buildings. You'll also see in the note there's a reference to BSI Flex 8760. Well, that's now British Standard 8760. That's the overarching standard which, if you like, allows then others to come later and develop competence frameworks which fit in. So if you're thinking ahead, that's something that you would want to do. You don't want others coming along later and creating something which runs into conflict with the whole purpose of this exercise. Now, as a normal British standard there, you would normally have to purchase it, but there is an executive briefing document available to you. It's free of charge, and I understand there is a link in the resources for this webinar. So I urge you not only to have a copy of the PAS, but to read the executive briefing document, which helps you understand where it fits into the bigger picture. So it is important that we don't see this work in building safety management and the work of such an individual just standing on its own. It's very much integrated into a larger scheme. And there was obviously collaboration between the respective development groups during the time that these PASs were being developed. We just got a few notes at the bottom there. During the development of this PAS, we did have to, let's say, connect with existing standards. Other standards have obviously been developed since then, but these are the ones which were core to our interests. I mean, one can go on and on sometimes with linking in with various standards that might just have a peripheral connection. These on here are ones which we felt were, if you like, supporting, underpinning the work in defining this competence framework. So as you might imagine there, maintenance management, you see it's a code of practice. Codes of practice normally use should. These are things that you should be doing. And you can see there's another one in there, the 9991, and there are others which have got specification or requirements in the title. Probably the one to just underscore for the moment, because we'll touch back on it a bit later, is 45001. That's a management system standard. And if you're going to manage safety, health and safety, occupational health and safety, then you need a structured approach for that purpose. And there is an international standard which is widely used, and I'm sure some of you are only too aware of that. So that's, if you like, the relationship aspect and where this particular PAS sits in relative to other standards. So we can move on to the next slide, please. And here we'll have a look at the scope of this PAS and the key principles. So if we just run down on the left-hand side there, you can see the competence requirements. Building structures, systems, and building services. Systems and components, or rather the interaction of them. Practices which will maintain buildings safe for occupants. Risk management, very clear what that is about. And then managing the golden thread of information, making sure that there is that history of everything that's gone and everything to the future that will come, so that there is a single source of truth about the particular building in question. Nothing stays the same, so managing change is important. And here you'll see the first instance, in effect, of that word behaviour. There's lots of technical competences, but behaviour is something which will make a big difference for the better if it's the right kind of behaviour. And we'll touch back on that in a little while. Leadership, communication and planning. So we need to be properly organised. We need to know what's happening. After all, we want an approach which is comprehensive. And lastly, their ethical behaviours, adherence to professional standards. Now, I'm just going to pause on this for just a little while because, not too long, but to make the point that building safety management, if you're going to fulfill that role, then there's lots of things that you have to be not just aware of, but you have to have competence in those different areas. That doesn't mean to say that, if you like, the depth of involvement, the depth of application of skills is going to be huge. But what's important is that we don't have any gaps. And there's many ways I can say this, but probably the easiest way to say is we can't afford for something to go wrong, something to fall in the gaps between competences that someone should possess. That would be unforgivable. So it is important that we understand the interrelationship, the interdependencies in the different areas, the different skill areas, the knowledge areas, and so forth. So it does seem broad, but I can certainly reassure those of you who wonder, goodness me, that is a lot for someone to take on. There are areas where it is a case of scaling the approach, but more again on that in a little while. Let's just go over to the right hand side now and look at the principles there. A person managing safety shall adhere to the behaviours and ethical practices in the PAS. Now, that is just one of the two principles. And it's so important to stress this point about the behaviours and the practices. Can have technical knowledge, can have certain skill sets, but it is important that people have the right behaviours. And that second principle there, the limits of an individual's competence, so very important there, that someone fulfilling this role in building safety management knows where they cannot go any further and have to involve others. That's so very important. We shouldn't have individuals, if you like, volunteering themselves to do something they're simply not equipped, they're not competent to undertake. If we can have the next slide, please. Now we get into quite a bit of detail here, and it'll go on and on and on into a lot more detail if we just allowed it to, but we're not going to do that. So we're looking at this on a fairly high level. These are the competence areas. And I know as I'm talking, you'll be looking down the list there. I'm just going to draw out a few of them, and then I'm going to pause on those towards the bottom just to make some additional points. I don't think it's productive to just go through lists of items like this, but certainly at the top there in the operating environment, you can understand that there is an environment within which people are performing work, and there are certainly responsibilities, accountabilities, and so forth. Then there's that aspect about people, behaviours, teamwork and leadership, understanding how buildings work as systems and with the interaction of various components. And we've heard already about the kind of things that can go wrong from Ian. So it is important that people do understand thoroughly these aspects. The operational practices, maintenance work which is being carried out, construction work and so on. Risk management, I don't mean to do this a disservice, but it is what it is. It's absolutely essential, and I think this is an area that really does need improvement generally across industry. And last, the one I just wanted to dwell on a little bit, the planning, monitoring and control. Some of you might be thinking, goodness me, project management, got to be doing that. Key principles. It's possible to equip oneself with the key principles and to separate the fact from the fiction, the myth from the reality, or the reality from the myth, that way of putting it. And so for completeness, we have to have these various competence areas in place. We can move on to the next slide, please. These are examples. So we've come down from those competence areas into something very detailed. So I'm just putting these up now. There's a whole annex in the PAS on the individual or detailed competencies. And this is where I think we just need to focus on the top to begin with. The interrelated and interdependent nature of the various competencies. I said before about the interrelatedness, the interdependence. It's so important that it fits together and provides a holistic support for people. And we've got some examples here, and I just wanted to focus very quickly on the key words in here. The key words are on the left-hand side: A, understand; B, explain; C, recognize. And then on the right-hand side, define, explain, identify, and appraise. We spend a long time worrying about these because it's important to know what, if you like, treatment one needs to give. So just now going back up to the top with the emboldened text there: skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors. Very easy to remember that. SCEB. And if you remember that, you'll never forget the key elements or key components of a competency. Behaviors is so very important. We can have people with the skills, they've got knowledge and experience, but the behaviors is absolutely crucial. And just finally on this slide, I thought it was appropriate to embolden rather those last few words about ensuring that in this particular context here that we are dealing with any particular threats that might exist or potentially exist for people with mobility, cognitive or sensory impairment. And if we could go on to the next slide, please. So competence assessment. So we're very clear that anyone who's managing safety needs to be able to demonstrate that they have the appropriate skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviors to fulfill the role, and they need to maintain them. It is necessary to have assessment and certification, maybe certification with a small c, but nonetheless, objective assessment of people's competence. And moving to the right here, the competence management. There we're talking about CPD, continuing professional development. The world's changing rapidly. Products, technology are changing rapidly, and everyone does obviously have a need to be updated. I've put a couple of references in there with respect to training and formal qualification, but there are others too. So it is important to acknowledge the Property Institute. You'll find Property Institute, if you didn't know already, at tpi.org.uk, and their Building Safety Hub with the .org.uk at the end of it is an excellent resource. And I do urge you, if you're not aware of those opportunities, to seek them out. And perhaps I should apologise for not actually having them on there. But next slide, please. And I'm going to leave my presentation at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, both Brian and Ian, and welcome back, Ian. Now we've had a number of questions come in, so without further ado, let's turn to those. Ian, starting with you, how do you bridge the gap between works for a leaseholder or a landlord while operating under an estate management system that may not work for all parties?
Okay. So it's firstly very dependent on identifying your RPs and your accountable persons first, and your duty holders. And in this case, an estate management system would, in my opinion, have duties under fire safety law if they're, affecting maintenance of the building, fire doors, fire alarm systems, etc., etc. So they are a duty holder, without a doubt, and they have duties under the fire safety law. There is a guide out, which is in the pack, I believe, for how to your duties as a duty holder. So they can't wash their hands of their role within that. And after that, it's there's the Article 22 is about cooperation and coordination. So fundamentally, they need to get together and ensure that the safety of the building remains the fundamental priority. You can't sort of leave gaps. That's what I'm saying. You shouldn't be a gap.
Absolutely. No, thank you. Brian, turning to you now. Is PAS 8673 a legal requirement?
Good question. In short, no. Standards are not legal requirements. However, if one is expected to work in accordance with a prescribed standard, and something goes untoward, then that could be brought into the consideration. I think in some parts of the world, it's not really relevant to say too much about, but some parts of the world, there's rather more force given to standards. But standards are not the law. But as I've said already, if the expectation is that you're working in accordance with it and you're not, then there's obviously some comeback there. And I've said already about the importance of having assessment, independent assessment, and demonstrating an ongoing commitment to developing building safety management as a competence in general.
Thank you. Ian, I think this one is more for you. What are the main causes or reasons that fire safety systems are disabled or removed during works?
So usually it's a fairly simple one with regards to fire alarm systems. That's the biggest one we come across, is them being disabled because you don't want to fill your detectors up with dust or get them painted on and things like that. So that's probably the biggest one we come across. It's not one we get reported into Cross, but it's one I've seen numerous times in my career as an engineer and fire officer. So that's probably the biggest one. After that, it would be fire doors, problems with them.
Thank you. And I think another question that's sort of related in a way, have you been involved in feedback from the building safety regulator? And are you seeing any common themes in the questions that they ask about?
Okay, so with the building safety regulator, so it's worth mentioning Cross are independent of them, albeit funded through HSE and the BSR. And we've talked about, as a Cross team, what BSR might do with regards to information they're getting from MDTs, multidisciplinary teams, where they're having conversations about new builds and going through gateways. And also what they get from mandatory occurrence reporting, which is the one where there's a mandatory duty on you to report an issue if it meets a threshold of a serious threshold. And that's, I think I've put that in the links as well. I can't recall, but do a search on that. But fundamentally, it's early stages at this stage with regards to information coming out of HSE. So what we're doing, we have strategic meetings with the building safety regulator and feed to them what we're seeing, rather than necessarily coming out the other way at this stage.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Brian, back to you. Why was it felt necessary to have so many competence areas for building safety management, and are all of them relevant?
Well, yes. Well, my starting point is they're all relevant, but I think one has to understand where the emphasis particularly needs to be put. I think there's a principle generally of ensuring you know what you need to know and be able to do across a wide front. And it doesn't, and it shouldn't imply that when we present such a framework as this, that everyone's expected to have complete mastery of all those competencies and the depth that goes with it. I think an important principle here is scaling the approach in the sense of placing emphasis where it's needed most, but not neglecting or skipping, leaving out something because, well, we don't really need to do that. And I think that's something I have found generally over time. I'm not talking specifically about the development of this particular PAS, but there can be a view sometimes that, well, do we really need to be doing that? Well, if we discuss it, we can discover the extent to which, for example, people need to have a particular skill set, what kind of knowledge base they need, and so on. But what we shouldn't do is say, before we've even given it proper consideration, well, it's not important. And I said earlier, I do worry that if we don't cover the ground, so to speak, something could happen, and it's fallen between two areas of competence or capability, and that would be most regrettable. Same time, I'm always, there's that old expression, a little knowledge can be a bad thing. I think people fulfilling this role have to know about a lot of things, but the depth of knowledge and the extent of the application of skills obviously varies. And the two little examples I gave on the detailed competencies was really there to, so you could see that it just wasn't a blanket approach, that you've got to have knowledge, understand all of this, that you've got to recognize something, you've got to be able to identify something, not simply fill your head with lots of information, let's say. And again, it's the behaviours which we've also got to ensure are inculcated into people.
Thank you. And I think related to that, actually, some of the competence areas suggest the need for substantial training and development. Is that realistic for such a role in building safety management?
I think it is. I think if you're going to do the job, you're going to do it properly. And I can give an example because it's one of the examples I gave with the Chartered Institute of Building. They have a self-study approach to a diploma. Others have training programs as well. And it is possible to acquire what you need, but it's not a 5-minute fix. This is not a YouTube video approach, with apologies to those of us who do have stuff on YouTube. It really needs to be taken very seriously. After all, the consequences for not taking it seriously are all too evident. And I think also we need to recognise that it is a professional role and it is recognised by institutes, and we shouldn't devalue in any way what we're trying to do here. It is a serious role that someone has to fulfil.
Yes, and one of the phrases that we've heard a lot since 2017 has been that of cultural change, and that does require people to think very seriously about training and development and making sure that people have the skills and the competence that they need to do, as you say, what are professional roles.
Indeed. I'm just a little rider to what I said there. There are some skills which can be imparted in a modest amount of time if you have the right guidance. So it's how are you able to do what you need to do? Well, is it about ability to perform a particular task, or is it something else? And understanding that and having the people who are experienced enough to be able to impart that is a key part of it.
Yeah, thank you. Ian, coming back to you. This is a slightly longer question. where emergency services such as fire alarms, PA systems, emergency lighting, etc., are disabled to enable construction works, are UPSs used or have the potential to be used to limit the impact of disabling those services?
So UPS is uninterruptible power supplies, I assume. So
I
yeah,
think so.
it's not good question. I've not really come across this. So often these services being disabled is zonal and for a reason to carry out works in a particular area. So it's not usually a blanket power off issue for 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 zones. If you're taking out an entire fire alarm system for a building uh, for a reason, yes, you could try and reinstate it with a UPS, but it's not something I've come across, to be honest. And you know, you'd have to put controls in place either way. You know, you can't do what, you know, some of the examples I've mentioned earlier is the RPs have done, shut it down, fingers crossed, and hope nothing happens. And that centrally leads you open to legal risks, let alone the risks you put your occupants at. So I would suggest a good start would be talking to a good fire risk assessor to review the fire risk assessment, get some controls in place, and see what you need to do. But I've not come across UPSs used in this case, no.
Thank you. One for you, Brian, that I think I may know the answer to, but I'm going to let you answer it anyway, because you will do so with more authority than I could. Can I leave out some of the competencies if I don't think they're relevant to my particular situation?
Short answer, no.
Is there anything you could elaborate on that, perhaps? Is why it's important to have that full coverage?
Well, no, but I will.
Yeah.
No, a very serious point is that we did spend a long time with all of those experts across the industry deciding what those competencies were, the relationship between them. And it's easy for me to say this after the event, but certainly if we needed to have it, we had it. And if it was something that generally people thought wasn't needed, we didn't. So we we felt that we put together what was a comprehensive set of competencies, and you know it's not for people to sort of pick and choose. They've got to take the whole thing. Otherwise, what's the point?
It works as a package. You need all of it together.
Because the bit that people miss out with the one that catches them out, it's inevitable, isn't it?
Yeah, I'll just add to that is critical in all of this is behaviours as well. That fundamentally underlines all of it. You can know everything and have the skill and knowledge and experience, but if your behaviours, you know, you don't use that in an ethical or appropriate way, that's where, you know.
And that's precisely it. It's the behaviour, isn't it?
Yeah. Thank you. And one for Ian, I believe. In relation to Article 9, why does my local authority indicate FRAs, I assume fire risk assessment, should be reviewed every 12 months?
Okay. This is a debatable topic because, you know, when do you need to review your fire risk assessment is a question, you know, and there's no set hard and fast rules. You know, a year is a good option for a lot of people, you know, particularly in a changing environment, changing rules and regulations and things like that going on at the moment. But if you've got a very stable premises with, you know, very well put in place systems, you could easily extend that to beyond a year, in my opinion. So it's not a legal requirement to be a year, but it needs to be sufficient that you're maintaining a good overview of your premises, ensuring nothing as significant has changed, and that you're meeting the requirements. You know, as an RP, you've got to ensure that you're, like I said before, it's got to be suitable and sufficient as the building stands at that time, and you'll have to defend that if things go wrong. So, yeah.
Thank you. And I think another one for you. With so many services passing through and above communal ceilings, is there a statement that states that live cables must not come into contact with life safety systems such as sprinkler pipework?
So generally that's a wiring regs thing, I would suggest. With there is a requirement for electrics to be not drop during a fire, and they're held in metal fasteners or trays. But I've not the electrical regulations would in my opinion be covering that, your insulation requirements for your cabling and even your life safety systems, your fire alarm systems again. But I don't know if there's a particular distance requirement between how far apart you space them, but I'm pretty sure that if you're using the correct wiring itself and the correct connections and junctions, you should be safe.
Yes, and I think the wiring regulations are generally a pretty good starting point for anything relating to electrical wiring. Yes, thank you. And then I think we've just got time for one final one, which I think is you again, Ian. When scaffold is erected on occupied buildings, at what height would you consider that boards need to be treated to make them fire retardant? There is very little guidance, and engineers often won't comment on this.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good question, because it's came through this report. Sometimes you can get metal boarding for scaffolding, and I would suggest if you're removing combustible cladding, you're going to be over 18 meters probably anyway, because that's where the bigger problem is. And at that stage, you really need to be thinking carefully about the risks of fire spread up the scaffolding and getting into the cladding as well. So that would be a good start. There isn't necessarily a good role, because it's very expensive to do so, and you need to manage risk with proportionality. It has to be proportional to the risk you're looking at. So if you're changing windows on a brick built building which is 20 meters high or what have you, your risk assessor might say, look, we're all right with timber boards, we'll just have hotworks controls in place, we'll have ensure there's a fire watch within the works system, and ensure that it's safe that way. So a good fire risk assessor can do a lot of good for you, ensuring that it's always the same case. If you go into something without a plan and without looking at and putting it down on paper and doing a piece of work, you can't defend it if you haven't written it down and if you haven't asked the questions of the issue. Even if your outcome turns out to be incorrect, you've at least tried to manage the risk, and that's a much better defense in a court of law than doing nothing and fingers crossed.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, I think we're coming to the end of the time we have today. But thank you, Ian and Brian, both for the presentations and for answering those questions. I hope everyone watching will agree they both gave us two very informative presentations, and that gave rise to some interesting Q&A afterwards. I'm grateful to both of our speakers for taking the time to share their expertise with us. It's very much appreciated. I believe if we go on to the next slide, that there might be some details of other webinars we have planned for the future. Yes, there are indeed, including topics such as PAS 2000, and that's the new PAS on construction products, and ensuring that those are safe. Eurocodes, the second generation of Eurocodes, is coming along quite well, in the process of coming along already, in fact. BS 9792 on fire risk assessment, BS 5266 Part 1 on emergency lighting, BS 4104 on retrofit assessment, and PAS 2035, I think that should be PAS 2035-2030, which is also on domestic retrofit. I'm quite pleased I remembered all of those. But yes, you'll find out a lot more about them if you join us for those webinars, and you can see there is a link in the slides to our events calendar. So thank you again, Brian and Ian, and thank you everyone for attending today, and we hope to see you again at another webinar in the future.